My lawyer's words were a death sentence for the life I knew. The man my daughter married doesn't exist. Now I have to sit at his dinner table, smile, and play the part of a loving mother-in-law while building the case that will destroy him and break my daughter's heart. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The late afternoon sun cast long, peaceful shadows across the polished hardwood floors of my study. It was a Friday, a day that in the 2 years since my retirement had come to hold a quiet, sacred quality. This was my time, a time for the simple, unhurried pleasure of being. I, Judge Evelyn Hayes, a woman who had spent 40 years in the loud, demanding world of the judiciary, had finally learned the beautiful language of silence. My home was my sanctuary. Each book on its shelf, each piece of art on its wall, a testament to a life built on a foundation of logic, reason, and a deep respect for the truth. I was in the middle of wrapping a small gift, a first edition of Gwendolyn Brooks' poems I had found for my daughter, Chloe. She and her new husband, Jonathan, were expecting me for dinner, a weekly tradition that had become the warm center of my retired life. I was still getting to know Jonathan, but my initial impressions were of cautious optimism. He was handsome, intelligent, and utterly devoted to my daughter. He had a kind of polished international charm, a product, he'd explained, of a career spent as a business consultant in Europe. He made my Chloe happy, and her happiness, after the loss of her father 10 years prior, was the most important thing in the world to me. Her laughter was a balm to my own weary soul. I finished tying the ribbon on the gift, my hands moving with the same meticulous care I'd once applied to a legal brief. I looked at the grandfather clock on my mantel, its steady tick, a comforting heartbeat in the quiet room. It was time to get ready. I stood up, my joints protesting with the quiet creak of age. As I did, my phone sitting on my desk buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced at it, expecting it to be Chloe, perhaps asking me to pick up a bottle of wine. But the name on the screen was not my daughter's. It was Aisha Clark, my lawyer. Aisha was more than my lawyer. She was my protégée, a brilliant, fiercely intelligent young woman I had mentored since she was a law student. She was now a partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. She was not a woman given to casual chatter. Our interactions were, like everything else in my life, efficient and to the point. The text message, however, was none of those things. It was a stark, jarring command, a string of 5 words in all caps that seemed to vibrate with a sense of barely suppressed panic. Judge Hayes, call me immediately. The text was a stone thrown through the stained glass window of my peaceful afternoon. My heart, which had been beating with a slow, contented rhythm, gave a sudden hard lurch. Aisha would never address me with such raw, undisguised urgency, unless something was terribly, catastrophically wrong. My mind, the old practiced judicial mind, began to race, sifting through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Had something happened to my investments? A problem with my estate? Or, the thought a cold, coiling serpent in my gut, had something happened to Chloe? My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the phone and dialed her number. Aisha answered on the first ring, her voice a tense, strained version of its usual confident cadence. "Evelyn," she said, dispensing with formalities. Her use of my first name was the second siren. "Thank you for calling back. Are you sitting down? Are you alone?" "I am, Aisha," I said, my own voice tight with a new cold dread. "What is it?" "What's happened?" "It's about Jonathan," she said, and the world seemed to narrow to the sound of her voice in my ear. "Jonathan Turner, your new son-in-law." She took a deep, steadying breath. "As you know, as part of updating your estate plan to include Chloe's marriage, I took the liberty of running a standard deep-dive background check on him. It's a routine practice for my high net worth clients, just to ensure there are no surprises. She paused, and in that small, silent space, I could feel a terrible, life-altering truth gathering its weight. Evelyn, she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious whisper, the man your daughter married. He doesn't exist. I sank into my leather desk chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. What do you mean he doesn't exist? The words were a stupid, nonsensical echo of her own. The name Jonathan Turner is a ghost, Aisha explained, her voice now a rapid-fire delivery of cold, devastating facts. There is no record of him. No birth certificate, no social security number, no university records from the London school he claims to have attended. The entire identity is a complete and total fabrication. I listened, my mind struggling to process the sheer, breathtaking scale of the deception. But who is he? I managed to ask. That, Aisha said, her voice now filled with a grim certainty, is where it gets worse. I had to hire a private investigator who specializes in financial fraud. His real name is Daniel Allen, and he's a professional, a highly sophisticated con artist who preys on successful, lonely women. The rest of her words were a torrent of ugly, unbelievable truths. She told me of other marriages in other states, under other names. A wealthy doctor in Texas, a tech entrepreneur in California, a widowed art gallery owner in New York. The pattern was always the same. He would sweep them off their feet, isolate them from their families, gain control of their finances, and then disappear, leaving them in emotional and financial ruin. He's a predator, Evelyn, Aisha finished, her voice a low, angry growl. And your daughter, she's not his target. You are. Her marriage to Chloe is just the first move in his game. The end game is your estate. The call ended. The charming, handsome man who was at this very moment waiting for me to arrive for dinner, the man my daughter loved with her entire trusting heart, was a monster. And he was coming for me. My first instinct was that of a mother, a raw, primal urge to protect my child. I wanted to race to my daughter's house, burst through the door, and expose the monster she had married. But then, after the first hot wave of panic receded, the judge took over. 40 years on the bench had taught me that raw emotional reactions are almost always a tactical error. To rush in with accusations would be to show my hand too early. Jonathan, or Daniel, was a professional. He would twist my words, paint me as the paranoid, overprotective mother. Chloe, my sweet, besotted Chloe, would believe him. I would not just fail to save her. I would drive her further into his arms. This could not be a frantic confrontation. This had to be a case. I had to gather my own intelligence, observe the subject, and build an irrefutable case that even my own love-blind daughter could not deny. I looked at the clock. It was almost 6. I was expected for dinner at 7. My decision was instantaneous. I would go. I would walk into the lion's den. I would sit at his table, eat his food, and I would do it with a mask of serene maternal warmth, so perfect that even he, a master of deception, would not see the cold, calculating fury that lay beneath it. The drive to their house, a drive I had made 100 times with a heart full of love, was now a journey into enemy territory. My hands on the steering wheel were perfectly steady. My mind was a cool, quiet courtroom. Chloe met me at the door, her face alight with the pure, uncomplicated joy that was now painful to witness. "Mom, you're here," she said, hugging me. "Jonathan's just opening the wine. He made your favorite, coq au vin." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of a happy mother. I walked into the open-plan living room, and there he was, the monster. He was standing by the sleek, modern fireplace, a bottle of expensive wine in his hand, a look of warm, welcoming charm on his handsome face. "Evelyn," he said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. "So good to see you." He walked over and kissed my cheek, a gesture of familial intimacy that now felt like a violation, a cold, reptilian touch. The dinner was a master class in dramatic irony. I sat at their beautiful, candlelit table, and I played my part. I complimented the food. I listened with a serene smile as Jonathan recounted charming, completely fabricated anecdotes about a recent business trip to Zurich. He was a brilliant performer, I had to admit. His lies were a seamless, elegant tapestry. Chloe, of course, was his enraptured audience. She hung on his every word, her eyes shining with admiration. But I, the silent watching judge, saw the performance for what it was. The slight hesitation before answering a direct question. The way his eyes would briefly lose focus as he constructed the next level of his fiction. His charm was not a personality trait. It was a weapon. The first probe of my defenses came with dessert. With a casual air, Jonathan began to lay the first stone of his trap. He spoke of market volatility, of the uncertainty of the global economy, creating a subtle atmosphere of anxiety. Then he turned the conversation to me. "You know, Evelyn," he said, his voice a perfect mixture of respect and gentle concern. "I was thinking about your own finances. A judicial pension is a wonderful thing, so stable. But in this kind of inflationary environment, I worry that that it's too conservatively managed. You're leaving a lot of potential growth on the table." He was beginning. Not a direct play for my money. He was far too sophisticated for that. He was planting a seed of doubt, positioning himself as the wise advisor. "I've always been a cautious investor, Jonathan," I said, my voice a placid, untroubled calm. "Prudent," he said smoothly, "but prudence in this market can be a form of risk in itself." He then began to talk with vague but impressive sounding authority about an exclusive high-yield investment opportunity. "It's a private equity fund," he explained, "specializing in emerging green technologies. The returns are, they're staggering. But it's an invitation-only situation. They only deal with a very select, very sophisticated clientele." He was flattering my intelligence, appealing to my ego, offering me a secret key to a world he knew was different from my own. I needed a weapon, a subtle tool that would not attack him, but would instead plant a single tiny seed of doubt in my daughter's mind. I waited for a lull. Then, with a look of innocent, slightly confused curiosity, I turned to him. "You know, dear," I began, my voice a masterpiece of gentle warmth, "I was thinking about your time in London. Chloe told me you went to the London School of Economics. Such a prestigious institution." He smiled, on safe ground. "I did. A long time ago, I'm afraid. A truly formative experience." "I'm sure it was," I said. "I was just reading an article the other day about a wonderful old pub near the university, a place called the Seven Stars. It's been there since the 1600s. Did you ever go there?" It was a question based on a specific, verifiable piece of information Aisha and I had confirmed just hours before. The Seven Stars was a legendary institution, a place any student who had actually attended the university would have known intimately. Jonathan did not flinch. "The Seven Stars," he said, a look of fond, nostalgic recognition on his face. "Of course, a bit of a tourist trap, if I'm being honest, but we all went there a few times. A classic." It was a perfect lie, plausible, confident, and utterly false. I did not challenge it. I simply let it hang in the air. Then I allowed a small, almost imperceptible frown to crease my brow. "That's funny," I said, my voice a soft, musing sound. "My old colleague, Judge Abernathy, His daughter went there as well, and she said it was so overrun with tourists that none of the real students ever went there. I let the small, seemingly insignificant inconsistency settle in the quiet of the room. Then I smiled warmly and changed the subject. But for a fleeting, almost invisible moment, I had seen it. It was not suspicion in my daughter's eyes. It was not doubt. It was something far smaller. It was a flicker of pure, unadulterated, and deeply uncomfortable confusion. It was the look of a person who has just heard a single, dissonant note in the middle of a beautiful, perfect symphony. It was a crack, and I knew in that moment that it was a crack I could, and would, eventually break wide open. I pleaded a headache and made my escape. The drive was not back to my own quiet sanctuary, but to the stark, modern, and brilliantly lit offices of Aisha Clark's law firm. The conference room, a place of sleek furniture and panoramic views of the glittering nighttime city, became our war room. The mood was not one of panic, but of a cold, focused, and deeply professional fury. "He's good," I said, my voice a low, grim acknowledgement of my enemy's skill. "He's patient, charming, and his lies are seamless. He's already made his first move." I recounted the entire surreal dinner, from his investment pitch to the smooth, plausible lie about the pub. Aisha listened, her expression growing more grim with each detail. "He's following the classic playbook," she said, her voice tight with urgent anger. "Establish trust, create financial anxiety, present himself as the sole solution, and then isolate the target. His next move will be to get you to sign something." She turned to her laptop and projected a file onto the large screen at the end of the conference room. This was the full, ugly fruit of her private investigator's work. For the next hour, I looked at the real life of the man my daughter had married. It was a gallery of ghosts. A marriage certificate from Houston, Texas, under the name of David Allen, to a wealthy, recently widowed surgeon named Dr. Alistair Finch. There was a photo of him smiling at a charity event in San Diego, under the name of Richard Shaw, his arm around a successful tech entrepreneur. Another marriage license from New York, under the name of Michael Vance, to an art gallery owner. The names were different, the women were different, but the pattern was identical. Each marriage had lasted approximately 2 years, and each one had ended with the woman in a state of complete financial ruin. The file contained copies of lawsuits, of bankruptcy filings, of restraining orders. I looked at the face of Dr. Finch, a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. The investigator's notes were brief and brutal. Lost her practice, her home, currently lives with her sister, refuses to speak about the marriage. Seeing her face, seeing the cold, hard proof of his predatory history, solidified my resolve into a thing of pure, unadulterated steel. This was not just about protecting my own fortune. This was about justice. "We have to show this to Chloe," I said, my voice a low, pained whisper. Aisha shook her head, her expression a mixture of professional caution and deep personal sympathy. "Not yet, Evelyn. Right now, she is a true believer. If we show her this, she won't see it as proof of his guilt, but as proof of our conspiracy against him. He'll tell her it's a forgery, a desperate attempt by her jealous mother to ruin her marriage, and she will believe him. We have only one shot at this. We have to create a situation where his guilt is so undeniable that even she, in her love, cannot deny it." Her words landed with the heavy finality of a gavel. "We have to make her a witness to her own husband's crime." And so, in the late quiet hours of the night, in that brilliantly lit war room high above the sleeping city, we devised our trap. It was a plan that was both simple in its concept and profoundly gut-wrenchingly difficult in its execution. It would require me to lie to my own daughter, to feign a weakness I did not feel, and to walk willingly into the very center of the predator's snare. The plan was this. I would call Jonathan. I would pretend his words at dinner had had their intended effect, that I was now worried about my finances and intrigued by his investment opportunity. I would agree to invest a substantial sum of money, a sum so large that his greed would override any lingering caution. The sum we chose was $2 million. It was a number large enough to be an irresistible bait, and small enough to be a plausible amount for a retired judge to have in liquid assets. The second part of the plan was to control the environment. I would insist, as a cautious old-fashioned investor, that the final signing of the paperwork take place in a neutral, professional location, the conference room of my own trusted lawyer. I would frame it as a simple procedural necessity. Jonathan, confident in his own fraudulent documents, would see it as a final bureaucratic hurdle to be easily cleared. The final and most crucial part of the plan was to ensure Chloe was a witness. I would have to convince my own daughter to be in that room, to sit at that table, and to watch as the man she loved attempted to defraud her own mother. The pain this would inflict upon her was a weight I could barely stand to contemplate. But I knew with a mother's terrible and absolute certainty that it was the only way. The truth, when it came, could not come from me. It had to come from him. As we finalized the details, my phone rang. It was Chloe. My heart seized. I looked at Aisha, who nodded grimly. I answered, putting the phone on speaker. "Mom, are you okay? You left so suddenly." Her voice was laced with genuine concern. "Just a headache, sweetheart. I'm feeling much better now." I lied, the words tasting like ash. "Oh, good. Listen, Jonathan was just saying he felt terrible. He thinks he upset you, talking about money. He was just worried about you, you know." "I know, dear. He's a very thoughtful man," I said, my eyes locked on the picture of his last victim on the screen in front of me. "He is," Chloe said, her voice filled with love. "He loves you almost as much as I do." The line went dead. The silence in the room was suffocating. The strategy was set. The trap was designed. All that was left was for me to find the courage to bait it with my own and my daughter's heart. I stood to leave, my body aching with a fatigue that went bone deep. "Thank you, Aisha. I'll make the call in the morning." "Get some rest, Evelyn," she said, her voice soft. "The next few days are going to be a war." I drove home through the empty city streets, the weight of our plan pressing down on me. My quiet, orderly house felt different now. Violated. The familiar spaces no longer felt like a sanctuary. They felt like a stage, the setting for the terrible final act of a play I never wanted to be in. As I walked into the foyer, the familiar silence of the house seemed wrong. It felt watchful, heavy. I stood motionless, listening, every nerve on high alert. Then I heard it. A soft creak from the floorboards on the second floor. A sound that was not the old house settling. It was the sound of a footstep. My heart stopped. I was not alone. My breath caught in my throat. The house was silent again, but the sound had been unmistakable. A weight. A presence. My mind, trained to assess threats, screamed at me. He was here. Jonathan? Daniel. He had a key. He knew my schedule. He was in my sanctuary. My hand flew to my purse, my fingers closing around the cold, heavy shape of my phone. I could call 911. I could run. But the judge inside me took over, cold and calculating. A confrontation now would be disastrous. It would expose everything, destroy the plan. I needed to control this. I took a slow, silent step backward, toward the door. Then a light flicked on in the upstairs hallway, casting a long rectangle down the staircase. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, and my heart hammered against my ribs. It was Chloe. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with sleep. She was holding a book. I couldn't sleep. "I hope you don't mind. I let myself in. I was worried about you." The relief was so sudden, so absolute, it almost buckled my knees. I forced a smile, my body trembling with leftover adrenaline. "Of course not, sweetheart. I'm sorry I woke you." "I brought you some of that chamomile tea you like," she said, already turning toward the kitchen. The utter normality of it was dizzying. She had no idea she had just walked into her mother's worst nightmare, a fear conjured by the man she adored. The monster was so effective, he didn't even need to be present to terrorize me. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee in front of me. With Aisha listening silently on the line, I made the call to Jonathan. I pitched my voice to a careful mixture of grandmotherly warmth and a new, slightly anxious financial insecurity. "Jonathan," I began, "I've been thinking all night about our conversation. I'm afraid you were right. My pension, it isn't keeping up. For the first time in my life, I'm feeling a little scared." I could almost hear the triumphant, predatory smile in his voice as he listened. I was taking the bait. I was swimming right into his net. "Evelyn, I'm so glad you called," he said, his voice a smooth, reassuring purr. "I was so worried. I told Chloe, your mother is such a brilliant woman, but the financial world has changed so much. We have to help her protect herself." With a feigned, slightly embarrassed reluctance, I told him I was interested in his investment opportunity. I told him I had $2 million from a long-term investment that had just matured and that I was looking for a place to put it to work. His excitement, which he tried and failed to conceal, was a palpable thing, a greedy electric hum on the other end of the line. We agreed to a meeting. "Let's do it tomorrow," he said, pushing for speed. "I can come to you. We can sign everything at your house. Keep it comfortable." This was the first move in the verbal chess match. He was trying to control the territory. "Oh, that's very kind, Jonathan," I said, injecting a note of fluttery helplessness. "But my lawyer, she's an absolute stickler for the rules. She insists we do it in her office, in a formal setting. It's part of the trust she set up for me." There was a beat of silence. I could feel him weighing his options. "Of course," he said, his voice smooth as silk again. He was too close to the prize to let a small bureaucratic hurdle stop him. "Your lawyer's office it is. We should have Chloe there, too, as a witness. It's important to keep everything in the family." He had no idea he was agreeing to meet his own executioner. The conversation with my daughter was, as I had known it would be, even harder. I called her an hour later, my voice now full of a new, completely fabricated excitement. "Chloe, sweetheart, I have the most wonderful news. I had a long talk with Jonathan this morning, and I've decided to take him up on his wonderful investment idea. I'm going to invest with him." The silence on the other end of the line was for a moment complete, and then Chloe's voice, when it came, was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Mom! Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I knew you'd come around. I knew you'd see how brilliant he is." Her happiness was a sharp, painful knife in my heart. She saw this not as a financial transaction, but as a symbol of my final, absolute acceptance of the man she loved. "And sweetheart," I continued, the words a bitter pill, "I want you to be there. The meeting is tomorrow at Aisha's office. I want you to be a part of this new chapter of trust between your husband and me." "Of course, Mom," she said, her voice thick with happy, grateful emotion. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Oh, we have to celebrate. The three of us. Let's do brunch this weekend." It was the last thing I wanted, another performance. But to refuse would raise suspicion. "That sounds lovely, dear." The brunch was an ordeal. We went to a bright, trendy restaurant packed with the city's elite. Jonathan was in his element, holding court, charming everyone. Friends of mine came over to the table to congratulate Chloe and to meet the wonderful man who had made her so happy. I smiled until my face ached, accepting their compliments on my daughter's good fortune. Each word, another small betrayal. As the meal wound down, Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket. "Evelyn," he said, his voice warm and expansive. "A small token. To mark the occasion." He slid a long velvet box across the table. Inside was a beautiful, weighty fountain pen, its nib gleaming gold. "It's for signing away your worries," he said with a wink and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I picked it up. It was cold and heavy in my hand. It felt like a weapon. The table was full of laughter and light, but a chill snaked down my spine. This wasn't a gift. It was a threat. A reminder of what he wanted, of the power he thought he already had over me. Chloe beamed, oblivious, squeezing his hand. He leaned in, his voice a low whisper meant only for me, his breath warm against my ear. His words were a drop of ice in my veins. "And for signing everything else over to family." The text message alert chimed on Monday morning, a sharp, intrusive sound in the quiet of my study. It wasn't from a person. It was a notification from my bank. My heart rate kicked up a notch. I had set alerts for any transaction over $1,000 on the small joint account I shared with Chloe, an old account we used for shared household expenses and gifts. I tapped the screen, my blood running cold as I read the words. Withdrawal confirmed, $25,000. Payee, Turner Global Ventures. Turner Global Ventures. I had never heard of it. It had his name written all over it. $25,000. It wasn't a catastrophic amount, but it was a violation. A test. He was probing my defenses, seeing what he could get away with. And he had used my daughter to do it. I immediately called the bank. The transaction was legitimate. The clerk informed me politely. It had been authorized by the other signatory on the account, Chloe Hayes. Authorized for what she had described as an emergency pre-investment opportunity. The phrase was his. Clinical, jargony, and utterly false. The money was already gone. My fury was a white-hot, focused beam. I drove to their house, the pen he had given me feeling like a block of ice in my purse. Chloe was home alone, humming as she arranged flowers in a vase. She looked up and smiled when I walked in, a smile that faltered when she saw my face. "Mom, what's wrong?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. $25,000, Chloe, from our account, to something called Turner Global Ventures. Her face, for a split second, registered confusion. Then the shutters came down. An expression of careful defensiveness replaced her surprise. She had been coached. "Oh, that," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Jonathan found the most incredible opportunity. Some sort of seed funding round. We had to move fast. He put up his own money, too, of course." "His own money?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Chloe, this is our money. My money. He had you take it without even speaking to me." "It's our account, Mom, and I'm his wife," she said, a hard edge creeping into her voice. "He needed my signature. It's all perfectly legal. Honestly, I thought you'd be thrilled. He's already making your money work for you. This isn't about the money. This is about the deception. He used you." That was the wrong word. Her back went ramrod straight. "Used me? How dare you? He included me. He trusts me. Something you clearly don't do. You know, he warned me this would happen. He said you'd see it as a threat, that you can't stand to lose control." The words were his, but they came from my daughter's mouth, dripping with a new and unfamiliar venom. This was the isolation Aisha had warned me about. He was turning Chloe against me, using her love as a shield and a sword. I am not trying to control you. I am trying to protect you. My voice rose, the judge's composure cracking under the strain of the mother's fear. Protect me from what? She shot back, her hands on her hips. From a happy, successful marriage? From a man who adores me? Maybe you're the one who needs protection, Mom. From your own paranoia and jealousy. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. She had never spoken to me like that in her life. I saw Jonathan's work, his careful poisoning of our relationship, and my heart broke. There was no winning this argument, not with words. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, my voice hollow. I turned and walked out, the sound of her angry tears following me. The fight had cost me. It had pushed Chloe further into his camp and alerted him that I was watching his every move. But it also gave me something, an opportunity. I knew they were going out that evening to a gallery opening. Chloe had mentioned it during our argument, throwing it in my face that she had a life, a wonderful life that didn't revolve around me. I waited, parked down the street from their house, my heart pounding with a mixture of shame and grim determination. I felt like a criminal, skulking in the shadows. But I was a judge who had run out of legal options. I was a mother fighting a predator for her child's life. When their car pulled away, I gave them 10 minutes. Then I used the emergency key Chloe had given me years ago and let myself into the house. It felt like a trespass. The house was filled with their life together, with photos of their smiling faces. My hands were shaking as I started my search. His office was immaculate, sterile. Nothing. His closet, his dresser, all perfectly organized. Nothing. Where would a man like him hide his secrets? I stood in the middle of their bedroom, my eyes scanning the shelves of books. It was a curated collection. Art books, business bestsellers, nothing personal, except for one. A worn paperback copy of The Great Gatsby, a book he had once quoted to Chloe. It felt out of place. On impulse, I pulled it from the shelf. It was lighter than it should have been. The center pages had been carved out, creating a small, hidden compartment. And inside, nestled in the hollowed-out heart of a story about glamorous deception, was a slim, black burner phone. I took it, my heart hammering. I walked out of their house, locking the door behind me, feeling like a thief who had just stolen back a piece of her own soul. Back in my car, parked under the dim glow of a streetlight, my hands trembled so badly, it took me 3 tries to power it on. There was no password. The screen lit up. There were dozens of messages. I opened the most recent thread. My blood turned to ice. The first message on the screen was from a contact labeled only handler. It was sent 2 days ago. The mother is biting. I drove straight to Aisha's office, the burner phone clutched in my hand like a venomous snake. We huddled over it in her conference room, the city lights a cold, indifferent backdrop. The messages were a horrifying window into his operation. Coded language about targets, asset liquidation, and extraction timelines. There were references to Chloe, codenamed The Key, and to me, The Vault. He has a partner, Aisha said, her voice grim. Someone managing the operation from a distance. We can't trace the number. It's a military-grade encrypted routing system. He's even more sophisticated than we thought. The phone was a smoking gun, but without knowing who Handler was, it was a gun pointing into the dark. The next morning, my own phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice was small, tearful. "Mom, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I was awful. Jonathan told me I was out of line. He said we need to respect you, always." The apology was his, not hers. Another calculated move to pull me back in, to soothe the waters before the kill. "We all say things we don't mean when we're upset, sweetheart," I said, playing my part. Please come to the fundraising gala with us tonight, she pleaded. Jonathan's firm is a major sponsor. It would mean so much to him. To us. Please, Mom, show him you're sorry too. Then came the blow that knocked the air from my lungs. Her voice dropped, filled with a fragile, wondrous joy. And we have an announcement to make. You're going to be a grandmother. The world tilted on its axis. A baby, a child, his child. This changed everything. The stakes were no longer just money or a broken heart. This was about a new life, a life that would tie my daughter to that monster forever. My silence stretched too long. Mom, are you there? Are you happy? Of course, darling, I whispered, a storm of emotions, joy, terror, rage warring inside me. That's wonderful news. I had no choice. I had to go. The gala was a glittering affair at the city's most exclusive hotel. I felt like I was walking through a dream. The news of the baby a constant, dizzying hum beneath the surface of the music and chatter. Chloe was radiant, her hand resting on her still, flat stomach, a secret smile playing on her lips. Jonathan was at her side, the perfect picture of a proud husband and father-to-be, accepting congratulations from everyone who passed. He took the stage to announce his firm's contribution. Tonight is about building a better future for our children, he said, his eyes finding mine in the crowd, which is why my firm is proud to donate $10,000 to this wonderful cause. He was donating my own money, laundered through the account he'd raided, to buy himself public adoration. The irony was suffocating. After the speech, as Chloe was surrounded by well-wishers, I felt a presence at my elbow. I turned to see an older man, his face etched with worry, staring intently at Jonathan across the room. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I saw you with him. You're his mother-in-law?" "I am," I said, my senses on high alert. "My name is George Abernathy," he said. "It was Judge Abernathy's brother. My sister. She was married to a man who looked just like him, about 5 years ago, in Houston. He called himself David Allen. It ruined her." My blood ran cold. One of the victims from Aisha's file, the surgeon. This was her brother. Before I could respond, Jonathan was there, a cool smile on his face, his hand proprietary on my arm. "Evelyn, darling, are you monopolizing all the interesting guests?" he said smoothly, then turned his brilliant smile on George. "Jonathan Turner, a pleasure to meet you." George flinched, his face paling. "You," he stammered. "I know you." Jonathan's expression shifted to one of perfect practiced concern. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage," he said kindly. "No, George was flustered, pointing a trembling finger. "You're the man who destroyed my sister's life." The accusation, though spoken in a choked whisper, cut through the nearby chatter. A few heads turned. Jonathan's response was a masterpiece of manipulation. He put a comforting hand on George's shoulder. "Sir, it sounds like you've been through a terrible ordeal, and you're right to be angry. But I assure you, you've mistaken me for someone else. Perhaps you've had a little too much to drink tonight." He signaled a waiter with a flick of his eyes, dismissing the man with a veneer of compassion that was chillingly effective. He turned back to me, his smile a tight, brilliant slash. The crowd's attention moved on. The scene was neutralized. Later, as Chloe went to the powder room, he cornered me by a deserted service corridor. The charm was gone. His eyes were chips of ice. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin, his grip surprisingly strong. "That was a clumsy little performance," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You will not interfere with my family again." The word family was a slap in the face. His grip loosened as he saw Chloe approaching in the distance. The handsome mask slid back into place. He leaned in, his smile returning, a terrifying parody of warmth. "Tell me, Evelyn," he whispered, his voice once again light and conversational. "Does your daughter know you've been investigating her husband?" Part 6. The next morning, George Abernathy called Aisha's office. He was frantic, apologetic for the scene, but resolute. "I have proof," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "My sister, Alistair. She was a meticulous doctor. She kept everything, emails, scans of ledgers he thought he destroyed. She was too ashamed to go to the police, but she kept a file, a just-in-case file." Aisha met him at a coffee shop an hour later. The file was a gold mine. It was Jonathan's, Daniel Allen's, entire playbook, laid bare in black and white. It detailed the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the systematic way he drained his victims' assets. It was the linchpin of a federal case, a Rosetta Stone of his crimes. While Aisha was securing the evidence, Jonathan was accelerating his own plan. He knew he had been exposed, at least to me. His timeline was collapsing. He told Chloe he was taking her on a surprise baby moon, a romantic getaway before the baby arrived. "No phones, no computers," he'd said lovingly, "just us." When she hesitated, he'd taken her phone from her hand with a gentle smile. "Let me help you disconnect, my love. I'll take care of everything." He was isolating her completely. He came to my house that afternoon, unannounced. He found me in the garden. He was holding the thick, professionally bound investment prospectus. He was done with subtlety. This was a direct power play. "Evelyn," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "we're signing these today. Here, Chloe and I are leaving tonight for a much-needed vacation, and I want your future secured before we go." My heart hammered against my ribs. The garden, my peaceful retreat, suddenly felt like a cage. "Jonathan, we agreed. The signing will be at Aisha's office." "Aisha is slowing things down," he said, his voice flat and cold. "This is a family matter. We don't need lawyers complicating things." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "Sign the papers, Evelyn. For Chloe. For your grandchild." The threat was naked now. He was using the baby, my own flesh and blood, as a hostage. I held his gaze, my mind racing. I had to stall. "The funds won't be liquid until tomorrow afternoon," I lied, pulling a date from thin air. "My bank requires 24 hours' notice for a transfer of that size." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Fine. Tomorrow afternoon. Be ready." He turned and left without another word. Meanwhile, at their house, Chloe was packing. She was uneasy. The fight at the gala, Jonathan's sudden urgency, taking her phone. The dissonant notes were becoming a chord. She needed her passport for the trip. He told her it was in his briefcase. She opened the smooth leather case, expecting to see her passport tucked inside. Instead, she saw a stack of them. She pulled them out. They were all identical, all with the same dark blue cover of a United States passport. She opened the first one. His picture stared back at her, but the name was Richard Shaw. Her hand started to shake. She opened the next one. The same picture. The name was Michael Vance. Her breath hitched. The next was David Allen. And then, at the very bottom of the stack, was one more. The name was Jonathan Turner. And below it, in smaller print, it read, "See Amendment, page 2, for legal name change." With trembling fingers, she turned to the amendment page. A stamp from a courthouse in a state she'd never been to. "The bearer of this passport, formerly known as Daniel Allen, is hereby legally recognized as Jonathan Turner. Daniel Allen. The name George Abernathy had choked out at the gala, the pub in London, the sudden trip, the money from her mother's account, the missing phone. It all crashed together, a tidal wave of sickening truth. The beautiful, perfect symphony of her life shattered into a million screeching, discordant pieces. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, was a lie. She sank to the floor, the passports fanned out around her like a hand of losing cards. She picked up the one for Daniel Allen, the one with the name that felt like poison on her tongue, her husband, a complete and terrifying stranger. She walked out of the bedroom, her movements stiff and robotic. She stood at the top of the stairs, her heart a block of ice in her chest. She looked down and saw him through the window, getting into his car, a confident smirk on his face after his confrontation with her mother. He was a predator, leaving one victim to prepare the trap for the next, and she, all this time, had been the bait. Chloe didn't say a word. She backed away from the top of the stairs, the Daniel Allen passport clutched in her hand so tightly her knuckles were white. She slipped into her old childhood bedroom, a room she hadn't used in years, and closed the door. Her mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and fear, but beneath it, a core of her mother's steel was beginning to form. Jonathan had taken her phone, but he'd forgotten about the old tablet she kept in her desk drawer, a relic from her college days. She powered it on, her hands shaking as she typed. She sent a message to my secure email address, one I had set up for emergencies years ago. I know. Don't sign anything. Stick to the plan. He has my phone. I'll be there. The message arrived on my phone as I stood in my kitchen, my own hands trembling after Jonathan's visit. The relief was a physical wave, so powerful I had to grip the counter for support. She knew. My daughter was not lost. She was a fighter. I replied with 2 words. I understand. The next afternoon, the stage was set in Aisha's glass-walled conference room. The air was electric, with a tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. I arrived with Aisha. Chloe arrived a few minutes later, alone. She looked pale and fragile, but her eyes held a new, hard light I had never seen before. She played her part perfectly, giving me a quick, tense hug. "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" I whispered. "Just nervous," she murmured back, a perfect imitation of a daughter anxious about her mother's finances. Jonathan strode in last, the very picture of confident success. He kissed Chloe, a gesture she endured with chilling stillness. He gave me a conspiratorial smile, the smile of a victor. He had no idea he was the only one in the room who didn't know the truth. He sat down and slid the thick, fraudulent prospectus across the polished mahogany table toward me. "Here we are, Evelyn," he said, his voice a triumphant purr, "the key to your new and much more profitable future." I picked it up, making a show of flipping through the pages. Chloe watched him, her expression a blank mask. Finally, I looked at Aisha and gave a small, decisive nod. "It all looks very impressive. Aisha, would you mind taking a look?" Aisha took the document. The room was silent as she scanned the pages, her face a study in professional concentration. Jonathan sat back in his chair, a look of smug, tolerant amusement on his face. He was enjoying the theater. Aisha finished her review, closed the folder, and looked directly at him. Her smile was gone, replaced by an expression of cool, unsettling curiosity. "Before my client signs this, Mr. Turner," she said, her voice as calm and as sharp as a scalpel, "or should I say, Mr. Allen, as you were known in Texas, I have a few other documents that I think your wife might be interested in reviewing." The name, Mr. Allen, hung in the air, a small, quiet, and utterly catastrophic explosion. The color drained from Jonathan's face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of pure shock. His body went rigid. He stared at Aisha, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes wide with the look of an animal caught in a trap it never saw. He turned to his wife, his last line of defense. "Chloe," he stammered, trying to muster a laugh. "Can you believe this? This is what your mother is paying for. Slander. Tell them, honey. Tell them how ridiculous this is." Chloe looked at him, her eyes clear of love, clear of illusion, filled only with a cold, devastating clarity. She said nothing. Instead, with a slow, deliberate movement, she reached into her purse. She slid the Daniel Allen passport across the polished surface of the table. It spun once before coming to a stop directly in front of him. "Why don't you tell them, Jonathan?" she asked, her voice quiet, steady, and utterly unforgiving. He stared at the passport, at the name that had just destroyed his world. The bluff, the charm, the entire fabricated identity. It all crumbled to dust in that one silent moment. He had been so focused on me, the vault, that he had never once considered that the key would be the one to lock him in his own cage. At that exact moment, the door to the conference room opened. Two plainclothes detectives stepped inside, their faces grim and professional. Jonathan looked from the passport to the detectives, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Pure, animal terror. The predator had just become the prey. The arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. There were no shouted commands, just the quiet, final click of handcuffs around Jonathan's wrists. The charming man my daughter had married evaporated before our very eyes, leaving behind a small, pathetic, and terrified stranger. He didn't speak. He simply sat there, head in his hands, as the full catastrophic weight of his own ruin settled upon him. As the detectives led him out of the conference room, he stopped and locked eyes with me. The terror was gone, replaced by a cold reptilian hatred. He mouthed two words silently across the room. "You did this." Then he added two more, a chilling promise that twisted in my gut. "It's not over." The threat hung in the air long after he was gone. My focus, however, was on my daughter. Chloe was in a state of profound catatonic shock. She had not cried. She had not screamed. She simply sat there, staring at the empty chair where her husband had been, her face a blank, unreadable mask. The ride home was silent. The city slid past the windows, oblivious. When we walked into the familiar quiet of my house, it was as if a dam inside her broke. She collapsed onto the floor in the foyer, her body racked with a storm of sobs so deep and agonizing, it felt like they were being torn from her soul. I knelt beside her, wrapping my arms around her, holding on as the beautiful world she had built with him shattered into a million irreparable pieces. By morning, the media storm had hit. The story was a Molotov cocktail of wealth, betrayal, and high society scandal. News vans were parked on my street. Reporters swarmed the front gate. The news that the con artist's wife was pregnant added a new tragic dimension to the narrative. Our private nightmare was now public entertainment. The stress was immense. In the middle of the second night, Chloe cried out in pain, her hands clutching her stomach. A terrifying rush to the hospital. A threatened miscarriage, the doctor said, brought on by extreme emotional and physical stress. As she lay in the hospital bed, pale and exhausted, my role shifted. The calculating judge receded, and the mother, the lioness, took over. I barred reporters from her room. I fielded calls from the district attorney. I sat by her bed for hours, holding her hand, a silent, steady presence against the wreckage. The victory, if one could call it that, felt like a profound and terrible loss. I had saved my daughter, but I had been forced to destroy her world to do it. The legal case was building, but it was complicated. The evidence from George Abernathy was strong, but the other victims, scattered across the country, were reluctant to come forward. They were scared. They were ashamed. They had rebuilt their lives and didn't want the old wounds torn open in a public trial. Aisha called me at the hospital, her voice heavy with concern. "Evelyn, we have a problem. The DA is worried. Without the other victims testifying, the case against him is strong, but not ironclad. He's a master manipulator. On the stand, he could still plant seeds of doubt, paint himself as a victim of a vengeful mother-in-law. We need them. Their stories are the only things that can show the jury the true pattern of his evil." I looked at my daughter, sleeping fitfully in the hospital bed, her hand resting protectively over her unborn child. Jonathan's threat echoed in my ears. It's not over. He was right. Exposing him wasn't enough. I had to make sure he could never hurt anyone again. Justice from the bench was one thing. This was another. This was personal. I knew what I had to do. I had their names. I had their files. And I had a story to tell them. The story of my daughter. Months passed. The city's chill gave way to the fragile warmth of spring. Chloe was healthy, home from the hospital, and her due date was approaching. The case against Daniel Allen was proceeding, but it remained shaky. The trial date was set, and the prosecution's witness list was alarmingly short. So I began to make calls. I flew to Houston. I flew to San Diego. I flew to New York. I didn't approach them as Judge Evelyn Hayes, a figure of the law. I approached them as Evelyn, a mother. I met Dr. Alistair Finch not in an office, but in the quiet garden behind her sister's small house. She was wary, her eyes haunted by a history I knew all too well. I didn't talk about evidence or testimony. I talked about Chloe. I told her about the baby, a grandchild who would be born into the shadow of this man's evil. I told her about my own fear, the gut-wrenching choice I had to make between my daughter's happiness and her safety. I showed her a picture of Chloe, her face luminous with a joy that was now gone. "He didn't just steal your money," I told her, my voice quiet. "He stole your faith. He stole your story and tried to erase it. My daughter is fighting to get her story back. And I believe you can too." One by one they agreed to speak. The trial was a spectacle, but in the courtroom, something powerful happened. It ceased to be about Daniel Allen and became about the women he had tried to destroy. Dr. Finch took the stand, her voice trembling at first, then growing strong as she detailed his methodical, emotional, and financial destruction of her life. The tech entrepreneur from San Diego followed, her testimony a cold, factual accounting of his fraud. The art gallery owner from New York wept as she described his betrayal. It was a montage of resilience, of women refusing to be erased. Their combined stories painted a portrait of a predator so clear, so monstrous, that his practiced charm withered under the courtroom lights. He was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, larceny, and identity theft. The sentence was long. It was justice. A year later, I'm in my study. The late afternoon sun casts long, peaceful shadows across the polished hardwood floors, just as it did on the day this nightmare began. But the silence is different now. It is not the silence of orderly solitude. It is the silence of earned peace. The grandfather clock ticks its steady, comforting rhythm. The door opens, and Chloe walks in. She is smiling, the light back in her eyes. In her arms, she holds my granddaughter, a beautiful, perfect little girl with a fierce grip and my daughter's eyes. She places the baby in my arms. Her name is Thea. It means goddess, but it also means to behold, to witness. On the table beside my chair is the first edition of Gwendolyn Brooks' poems I had bought for Chloe, what feels like a lifetime ago. Chloe picks it up and reads a line aloud, her voice soft. "We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. I look down at the sleeping baby in my arms, at this new, unbroken life. My career was built on a foundation of logic and law, of delivering justice from a place of cold, hard facts. But in the quiet of my study, holding my granddaughter, I understand. The most important case of my life was not one in a courtroom. It was one here, in the fierce, unconditional, and unbreakable bond of a family that refused to be broken. This was a different kind of justice. It was the justice of a mother's love, and it was enough. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.